Okay, it is now Sunday, August 31st. No, July 31st. Almost August. I'm jumping the gun. July 31st, 2016. My name is Joan Marie MacLeod Hemingway, and this is the second of two videos with my dad, Donald Terry MacLeod, who's 86 years old. He was born May 20th, 1930. Fought in the Korean War. In the Army, and his final rank was that of first lieutenant, and he served both in the United States and in Korea with the Army of the United States. So you and I both have had some time since we shot a video yesterday that was more of an overview of your entire tour of duty with the Army, a little bit about your background, a little bit about what happened after the war, and so I know you've had some time, Dad, last night to do some reflection. I went back and reviewed yesterday's video. I've done my own reflection. So today we're going to spend some time maybe filling in some details, telling some stories that we both forgot to evoke in some way or would like to evoke from yesterday's video. So I'm going to start with you because I know you have a set of notes that you brought with you, and just let you sort of fill in some gaps, and I'll try and ask you some questions to make sure we can contextualize them within the video that we shot yesterday, if that makes sense.
Yeah. In the vein of it's a very small world. When I got to Korea and finally got to the 45th Infantry Division, on the way there we took a train from Yeongdong-po, which is across the river from Seoul, to Chuncheon, which was the end of the railroad line, and then on a 2.5-ton truck over a defile to the 45th Division's rear, the headquarters. And almost the first person I met was Sergeant Randy Newble, who was my classmate in high school, and I hadn't seen in years. And that was kind of a very strange...
Small world syndrome, right?
Very
That's
small world.
One of those small world stories. Yeah.
Anyway, so some of the things that I sort of forgot in the 45th Division was the this is kind of mundane, but you have to be clean and be able to relieve yourself, etc. And so in the 45th we had where we were, which is way in the rear, maybe Army Reserve for all I know, we had we slept in tents, which was the best sleeping I ever got in Korea, and we had a latrine that officers could go to that consisted of some mortar tubes stuck in the ground beside our BOQs, tents, which were called piss tubes, and you can guess what they were for. And there was a box with a hole in the top of it and a lid on that in the front of our BOQs, in full view of the entire battalion, where you could relieve yourself, which was embarrassing to begin with. Of course, after a while you got used to it, but in the middle of winter, a frost used to settle on the top of it, and it was very uncomfortable.
Ow, I'll bet. Yeah, that's something we certainly didn't approach yesterday.
During the wintertime, showers were very scarce and far between. And as a matter of fact, the only shower you could have was the 8th Army shower point, which is even further to the rear than we were. And I got there once, and you take your clothes off. It's a big heated tent. Now, it was warmer than outside at any rate. And you take your clothes off, run under the shower, come back, lather up, and then theoretically you go under the shower again and wash out. Unfortunately, by the time after we got lathered up, the shower quit for a while, and so now we were there soapy and cool
and unrinsed.
And finally it got going again. But that was my one experience with the 8th Army shower point. In Korea during the winter we had winter sleeping bags, and the summer we had summer sleeping bags. Winter sleeping bags were down, and we slept in a tent that had a little rudimentary oil heater in it, and we had, of course, long johns. And finally, when the spring came along, and we no longer needed those, they took the sleeping bags and the long johns and burned them because they were absolutely oily and greasy.
I'll bet.
I was happy to get the new ones. While we were there, I have to rephrase this. While you're in that kind of environment, you tend to rely on each other greatly. Your life is in their hands at some of the time, and so it was one big "I'm for you, you're for me" kind of a thing, and it was something that you always did what you had to do for somebody else. We had two lieutenants come back through us to go going someplace else, and nobody would associate with them. We found out what the rumor was, and it probably was true, that they had refused to go out on patrol and were therefore going to be cashiered, and no one spoke to them. I mean, that was just the way things were at that time. What else have we got here? The other thing that you have in the Army is that if you're an officer, you'll get a publication saying, in addition to your other duties, you are hereby named, in this case, the Regimental Defense Council. And so I became the Regimental Defense Council, and I was pretty good at it, actually, to the extent that they decided to make me the regimental prosecutor. And now they had to, they were lucky because now I was a second lieutenant. They could appoint almost anybody, of any rank, to defense counsel, because Army doctrine was that the defense counsel had to be senior to the prosecutor. And so I had good results there as well. I remember that I said, I've never defended an innocent man, I never prosecuted an innocent man.
So talk to me about that. Do you remember any of the individual, I guess I'll call them trials, any of the individual
I had one investigation that I
had?
can remember very well. Most of these were pretty minor infractions, and the military police were the witnesses, and in examining the military police, a lot of the time things didn't quite add up, and so our court-martial boards were, I think, very, very fair, and they said, you don't have proof, case dismissed. This one time, this soldier was accused of stealing an Army radio. Now, it was not an Army radio, but a 78 band radio that was civilian radio, but it was all sort of dolled up in camouflage paint. And he had it in his possession, and this captain wasn't the investigating officer. And so he requested me as a defense counsel, basically. And in fact, I got a lot of that because I was successful. And so we kept talking, and I said, how do you explain to me that this is an Army piece of property? He says, look, I said, does it have a serial number? No. I said, well, it's not a serial number. How can you tell it's Army? It was the end of the investigation. And the captain probably could kill me. he would shot daggers at me through his eyes. But again, I was doing my duty. That's about it for, I think, the 45th Division.
So before we move on, can I ask you a question also about these two guys who were ostracized because they'd failed to, at least allegedly, had failed to go out on
accused
patrol.
Of cowardice.
Right. So you said, that people were there to be for each other, but it sounds like in that particular case, because they weren't there for other people because of their, at least, asserted cowardice, right? Other people weren't necessarily there for them. I mean, is it an officer's responsibility at all to say, hey, these guys are coming through, and you should be, regardless of what you hear, you should be as supportive
Nobody
of
told
them
us
as
anything.
possible. Okay.
Nobody. They were here, and nobody told us anything. We gleaned these facts, and perhaps they were not correct by other means. I don't know how they got it, but we understood that was the case. And that officers have to lead. If you can't lead, you have to get out of the way. And I don't know what happened to them. I have the biggest idea, whether they got a dishonorable discharge or other than honorable discharge or what. But they were no longer able to serve in their basic capacity. And so again, when you are out front and being able to be fired on, and you rely on somebody to be your backup. You have to rely on them. There's absolute bond of trust. If you can't do that, the guy's no good. You don't want him there. You want somebody else. And that's it's just that's the way it is.
Yeah, but there's no sort of duty to them as brethren to regardless of what you think or what you've heard about them or why they're passing through to reach out to them and incorporate them.
You're talking about friendships.
Or at least socialize them as opposed to. I mean, if this rumor hadn't existed about those two guys, would they have been treated the same? Were other people who came through without those rumors?
Let's put it this way: two officers coming back by themselves off of the front, from basically the front, and being and just being assigned for rations quarters for a day or two, and then going back, doesn't happen.
Right. So something's fishy about that.
Very, very odd kind of a situation. Okay. It was a disciplinary kind of a thing that had to be.
Okay. That's fair. One thing from yesterday's video that I had a big question about, and I mentioned it to you before we started the video rolling, is you had a great story in yesterday's video about how you got rid of some prostitutes who were attempting to solicit business, with your unit, and it was unclear to me from the video exactly when that took place, because you started off with the 45th Division and then moved to the 2nd Division and then into the battalion. It was unclear to me where in that trajectory the whole prostitution story came up.
It was with the 45th Division.
It was
and
with
what
the 45th
happened
Division.
was
Okay.
the 5th ROK Division, that's ROK's division, was pulled out of a blocking position in the Imjin Valley. Imjin Valley is the main corridor for invasion into South Korea. And they were going to...
Or was, because there wasn't really...
Well, any, still is.
I guess,
I mean,
okay.
there's only a choice.
For moving across the border. Okay.
And they needed somebody to replace them. And so our regiment was assigned to replace them. And it turned out that the key to position on that was right on the Imjin Valley, where my company was going to be stationed. We split the company in half. The company commander staying back in where we were headquartered, and I took half of the company there to prepare a place for the entire company to be able to bivouac. And we did that by pulling rocks out of the Imjin River and putting them in, ruining a perfectly good rice paddy.
Right. I remember you saying that yesterday. Good. Okay. That helps to tie it in.
We were right on what's called the MSR, the main supply route. And these gals would come by and try to solicit business. And I have a duty to try to keep these guys healthy. And so we would capture these gals, and the company sergeant major would say, "What do we do with them?" And I said, "Well, let's take one of their shoes off and put it up on the bulletin board and let them go. There was nothing we could do about it." And that seemed to work. They all of a sudden stopped coming. It was the middle of the winter, so having only one shoe was not a good idea.
No, I can imagine taking two away would have been, interesting too, but I think one does the trick, right?
Well, hopefully it did, at any rate.
Well, it seemed like it did under those circumstances.
I got one more at.
Did you have something else
No,
from
you
the
asked a
2nd
question
Division?
the other day.
Yeah.
About was I afraid?
Oh yes, I did.
And I said, no, um, you you get in a situation like that, and if you're not stupid, you basically get yourself sort of ready for some pretty nasty things that might happen to you. These two fellows that came through probably didn't. And so what I did find was the two times that we thought we were under attack turned out not to be, but your adrenaline goes through the roof, and you could leap tall buildings with a single bound. It was one case when I was chambering around in my M2 carbine, I pulled the slide right off the gun, had to put it back again. The weapons were a little loose at that time. But the great description I had of that was when I was in Fort Benning. I asked my platoon leader, who had been in Korea and been promoted in the field twice to first lieutenant. I said, "What is it like to be fired at?" He says, "Well, I'll tell you. I was in Korea and I was walking down the bottom of a drainage ditch. Now, drainage ditches there are 20, 30 feet deep. And he says, all of a sudden, a Chinese machine gun opened up on me, and the next thing I knew, I was out of the ditch." He said, "I don't remember touching either side, but I remember I got out of the ditch." So and that was adrenaline flowing, essentially, and that's what happens.
So it's less fear than just the body's normal response to sort of an emergent danger.
Yeah, right. I mean, again, if you sort of obsess with it, you're going to get
right.
Well, let's face it. If you're under fire, yes, you are afraid. We should be afraid. You're out of your mind if you're not, but you have to conquer that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see.
Did you have anything from the 2nd Division?
I got this. One of the things I did in the 2nd Division, I didn't get asked to be trial counsel or anything, but I asked to be a survey officer. Now, a survey officer is somebody that's called to survey the properties of dead soldiers and then write a nice letter home to their
loved ones.
And so you go through their gear, throw out anything that might be incriminating or debasing or anything like that, and then write a letter. So it was interesting. These two kids were on the front line, and they decided they wanted to get warm, and so they built a fire. Which is okay. That's not against the rules. Unfortunately, they built it on top of an unexploded mortar round, and it killed them both.
Oh dear.
There's dangerous stuff out there.
Yeah. That's very sad. Okay, and anything more from the battalion?
Well, again, while I was online in fact, on the outpost line with my battalion in the 2nd Division, we were very lucky. The prisoners were exchanged, and so all of the prison chasers on our side were armed with 12-gauge shotguns. They didn't know what to do with them, so they shipped them up to us because the place was alive with pheasants. So each battalion got 5 shotguns, and I had one of them. And that was a lot of fun. I had a Jeep driver, a redneck from Tennessee.
From Tennessee, where I'm from.
Who could spot a pheasant a mile away. And he said, "Look out, there's one, Lieutenant." But before I had that, before we had the guns, we were out there, the pheasants were there and everything. And there was one on the road just outside of the minefield that we were driving on. I stopped, and I had my M2 carbine, and I was trying to take the head off this pheasant, because if I hit him in the body, there wouldn't be anything left to eat. And we were eating them. That was our supplement to being sea rations out there. That was why we were eating them.
Okay, right. So this is dinner.
And so I fired, and the pheasant moved its head, and there was a puff of dust right behind him. It didn't work. Fired again, and the then S2 Lieutenant Parks came by, and he said, "What are you trying to do, Mac?" I said, "I'm trying to knock the head off that pheasant so we can have it for dinner tonight." He says, "Oh, that's easy." He pulls out his .45, and knocks the head off it. And I said, Parks, you couldn't do that again in 100 times. 45s are not that accurate.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, that's incredible.
We had him for dinner.
He wanted, I guess, all the bravado somehow. Maybe the adrenaline was flowing through his body too. Who knows?
It was something that happened. Other than that, I think we covered most of the ground yesterday on being on the outpost line, which is in front of the front lines. And I don't know if we made it clear, but the Imjin River flows from the north to the south. And as it gets to where the DMC and that sort of stuff, it comes down, it takes a big loop to the north, and then turns around and comes back, and then just goes straight down to Seoul. And my position was in that loop, north of the river, so that in addition to trying to get through our minefield if we ever got attacked, trying to get across the river might be a difficult job.
Yeah.
Well, there's a bridge. However, I would imagine that every piece of Chinese artillery was zeroed in on that bridge.
So was the minefield that we talked about yesterday? Was it north of the river or was it south?
It was north of the river, but south of us.
Oh, right.
So
exactly.
I mean, again.
So you would have had to go through the minefield and then across the river in that order in
yeah.
order to retreat if you needed
So
to.
it wasn't a pleasant prospect.
Yeah, no, I can
But
see
that's
why.
what you deal with it.
It is what it is, right? As they say. So, okay. Well, so let's talk maybe a little bit more. Let's go back. You were talking about Fort Benning, where you did your basic training a few minutes ago. Let's go back there. So what's it like when you show up at basic training? I mean, we didn't really talk about that. You said it was the best training you've gotten in your life, but I'd like to explore that.
It wasn't basic training. I mean, I'd been in the ROTC program for 4 years,
course, yeah.
And between your junior and senior years, you went to summer camp, which was your basic training.
Okay.
But this was officer school.
Right. Okay.
I mean, again,
that's right.
the commander of our company, student company down there, was a West Point graduate that was sent directly from West Point to Korea, and then still had to come back and go through the officer school, the infantry school, to be a career Army officer. And as a matter of fact, you can't function without that. You must go there. And it does. It's a very teaching thing. It shows. We had a strange thing happen there. We had a night problem, and the way things worked, there's two parts to the problem. One is everybody gets tested for night vision, and then the problem goes on. And then while they're being tested, somebody is doing the problem and then gets tested afterwards. Well, that was us. And we picked two guides, in this night problem, both of whom were night blind.
Oh dear.
We couldn't find our way. It was very instructive.
We got to see what it was like to be with somebody who was like that, and why it's probably a good idea to test people for that, right?
We found out things. It's amazing how simple field glasses make you see much better at night.
Wow.
Because it concentrates light, and you can see things. It's so good. It gives you a lot of confidence. And you go shooting, you go firing for record. Every time I fired, I was a sharpshooter, which was one below expert. And I shot expert on a light machine gun with a stock. But you learn to fire all the weapons. You become familiar with all of the things that you have to teach the kids when you go teaching basic training, which I did after I went.
Right, which I want to get back to in a minute too. Yeah.
When I went up to Indian Town, yeah.
So, was it much different from the ROTC basic training in terms of? Did you have like a different adjustment process? Because I assume that the first time you show up, with the ROTC, it's like, whoa, what have I gotten myself into?
We were taking courses.
Right.
Military. I mean, for instance, took enough courses so I could probably qualify for a double major in history and military tactics.
But you're living there in dorms, right? And you're
Oh,
with
yeah.
college folks. This all of a sudden seems much different, I assume, when you show up. Is
Well,
it like summer camp, or what's it like? you
We're,
know?
we're living in barracks.
Yeah,
And,
right. With a bunch of guys that are doing the same thing you're doing.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Taking a shower with a bunch of nude guys. It's,
But you played sports, so you probably had
yes,
to do that for
I
that
had no
too.
problem with that at all.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, it's how will I say? You're in the Army now, and I mean, again, you learn a lot in that 6 week program between my junior and senior year.
Mm.
One of the things I learned was kind of interesting. I asked this old sergeant. Now this is a master sergeant, been in the Army for 1,000 years, I think, and I said to him, what would be the best advice you could give to a young cadet who is going to be a second lieutenant in the infantry? And he thought for a second. He says, never sit when you can lay down.
Hmm.
Never stand when you can sit. And relieve yourself whenever you can, because you never know when you get another chance.
Wow, that's
That was a doctrine for life in the Army.
pretty good basic advice. It
Yeah.
sounds like. Good. All right. So you leave officer training camp at Fort Benning, and you then end up being an instructor yourself, and
Yes.
you're teaching basic training.
Teaching
So
transition.
transition for that. Had you ever taught before? What was what was the most
No,
difficult part about that?
No,
and the easiest part about
again, the people that teach courses probably did that. I mean, people that taught how to shoot the mortars and do all that sort of stuff. I was a company officer. Meant that I ran this company to wherever they had to go. I made sure that their barracks were clean and that they did all that a soldier was supposed to do. Normal kind of a company officer's deal. However, you weren't dealing with troops that had already gone through basic training. You had to teach these kids how to do those things at any rate. So that was as much of a teacher as I was. Infantry tactics, yes, we could do that. That was not a problem. But specialized training was done by people who had prepared for that kind of a thing.
We're going to run out of battery power, as it turns out. So I'm going to have to put a stop to this and see
Okay.
if I can find some other batteries.